It was supposed to be perfect, a land where dreams walked on Main Street and castles touched the California sky. But on July the 17th, 1955, Disneyland's grand opening didn't just make history, it nearly fell apart. Asphalt melted, rides broke, chaos reigned. Yet through the heat, the crowds, and the missteps, something magical still happened. The world saw, for the first time, what a dream looked like when it finally opened its gates. You ever notice how every great American idea starts with a kitchen table and a stubborn streak? That's how it felt with Walt. I still remember the first time I heard him talk about a park for families, not just kids. A place you wouldn't mind wearing a white shirt to. Clean, safe, a promise baked right into the sidewalks. Now this wasn't Hollywood. He picked Anaheim. Rows and rows of orange trees rolled out like a quilt. The air smelled like citrus and damp earth, and if you stood still long enough, you could hear sprinklers ticking in soft rhythm. I walked those fields when they were still groves, and the dirt clung to your shoes the way big ideas cling to their makers. They had a year, 1 year to turn groves into a kingdom. Budgets bled like knees on a gravel driveway. Plans changed by the hour. You could see it in the foreman's shoes, dusted in citrus, streaked in tar, walking blueprints that never stayed the same 2 days in a row. The thing is, it wasn't just construction, it was choreography. Wood, steel, paint, and willpower, all moving to a beat only Walt seemed to hear. And what a map he drew. 5 lands, sure, but really 5 pieces of American longing. Main Street wasn't a street. It was a memory of small towns where doors didn't lock and everyone knew the barber's name. Adventureland promised jungles you'd only seen in Saturday matinee reels. Frontierland smelled like gunpowder and promised the myth of wide open. Fantasyland was pure bedtime story, spires, carousels, and the sound of calliope music battling whatever the modern world had to say about it. Tomorrowland, that was hope in chrome, the rocket age on a ticket stub. Here's where it gets crazy. To pay for the dream, Walt made a deal with ABC, a weekly television show in exchange for money and a promise. The grand opening would be live. You could feel that deadline in every plank and cable. Cameras don't wait. America's living room was already invited, and the clock wouldn't blink. I watched crews pour foundations with the urgency of a fire drill that never ended. They'd hang a set of doors in the morning, paint them after lunch, and move the hinges by dinner. Some days, the ground itself seemed to be deciding what it wanted to be. Sections stood there like they were still dreaming, pretty to look at, not quite ready to be touched. Now remember, this is mid-50s California. Freeways were whispering the future into everyone's ear. Station wagons meant vacations, not just errands. The idea of a family, place, not a grim carnival with bent nails and sticky barkers, but something polished, felt like civilization rebooting itself. Walt wasn't selling rides, he was selling a ritual. You arrive together, you argue about which land first, you split a sandwich, you find your way back to each other by the popcorn stand. Meanwhile, money, always money. The budget kept stretching like hot taffy. Every creative decision had a twin made of compromise. You don't notice the cheaper bolt on opening day until the heat comes. Crews were inventing methods as they went, like papering over the bones of a town that had to look born, not built. They hid speakers in rocks. They weathered wood so it looked older than your granddad's stories. They painted forced perspective onto Main Street so the castle felt taller, while still small enough that kids could claim it with their eyes. One morning, I saw a foreman fold the day's plans into his back pocket, look at the sky, and just laugh. Not from joy, from exhaustion. Then he kept walking, That's how it went. The joke on site was that the sun punched a time card too. And then there was that choice nobody outside the fences understood. The plumbers were on strike. There wasn't enough labor to finish everything. Walt had to pick fountains or toilets, optics or dignity. He chose toilets. People mocked it later, the dry decorative fountains and the stunt of it all. But if you got 100,000 bladders to consider over a week, the math writes itself. It told you what kind of place he intended to build, not a movie set, a town that had to function. Art Linkletter popped by more than once, curious and smiling, the way showmen do when they sense a big moment coming. He'd ask how it played on television, and someone would point to the castle and shrug. If we can get the camera to blink, the audience will forgive the sweat. Ronnie Reagan would be there for the broadcast too, America's neighbor in a suit, helping shepherd the dream into people's living rooms. Television and the park grew up together like twins who swapped homework. The last week felt like a sprint through wet sand. You could hear hammers at midnight, smell fresh paint at dawn. The tree planters hustled in beds of flowers that still remembered the nursery. A worker brushed sawdust off a lamppost with his sleeve and whispered, "Hold, please," like he was talking to a skittish horse. When I walked under the railroad bridge for the first time, with the tracks still tacky from grease, it felt like threading a needle from the past to the future. The date wouldn't move. The world was coming. Every era would be live, every triumph too. And beneath the polish, the orange grove remained, roots under concrete, memory under spectacle. That's the secret spine. You could pave over it, but you couldn't erase it. That grove reminded the dream who it belonged to. Families, sunburned and hopeful, ready to believe. By sunrise, the heat was already leaning on the day. I parked farther out than I meant to, dust puffing up around my shoes, the kind that sticks to your socks and makes everything feel 1 degree more annoying. And then I saw it, the river of people, not a line, a swell, station wagons emptying like clown cars. Men in shirt sleeves, women in summer dresses, kids with hair slicked down and eyes too awake. 28,000, they'd say later. It felt like more. At the gates, you could hear the hum, metal turnstiles clicking, paper rustling, 1,000 conversations stacked into one sound. I slipped my ticket forward and felt elbows against my ribs. Some folks had clean stubs. Some had stubs that looked like they'd been kissed by a mimeograph one too many times. What nobody knew right then, counterfeit tickets were flooding in, smooth as any smile. The math was broken before the first parade step. We pushed through the tunnels under the railroad and spilled onto Main Street, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. Your shirt stuck to you and stayed that way. Kids tugged at hands toward the castle, small, perfect, a postcard you could walk into. Loudspeakers crackled. Somewhere, a barbershop quartet tried a harmony that got swallowed whole by the crowd. You could taste dust and sugar, equal parts. This was television's party, too. Art Linkletter, in a coat that didn't dare wrinkle, Raymond Burr somewhere in the scrum, and Reagan, neighborly, calm, that voice built for living rooms, ready to steer America through a brand new ritual. Cameras sat on cranes like birds of prey, cables coiled across the ground. Every step felt like someone had turned the park into a stage and forgot to leave enough room for the audience. Then the heat did something odd. The asphalt softened, not everywhere, but enough. High heels started to sink. Tiny indentations like thumbprints in warm butter. You take a step, feel a tug, then hear a tiny pop when the heel freed itself. I watched a woman laugh at the first step, frown at the second, and finally give up and go barefoot, carrying her shoes like trophies. And thirst. Thirst moved through the crowd like a rumor. The plumbers' strike had forced a choice days earlier, and toilets beat fountains. Good call for dignity, bad optics for July. The decorative basins, pretty as postcards, sat dry or trickled like shy creeks. Restaurants ran out of soda faster than anyone planned. Ice was a myth. People queued for anything that looked like relief. Paper cups became gold. I saw a cast member refilling water from a back spigot into anything that would hold it. Wax cups, baby bottles, a rinsed-out popcorn carton that did the job just fine. Lines for rides stretched like laundry on a long street. You could hear the language of impatience. Moms bargaining, dads negotiating, kids bouncing between delight and short fuses. The phrase, happiest place on earth, drifted in the air like a dare. Meanwhile, live cameras hunted for smiles. Art did patter. Reagan eased the tone. Backstage, someone was counting minutes like they mattered more than hours. I edged toward the hub where you choose your first myth. Fantasyland's drawbridge looked like a promise made to every bedtime ever. Adventureland's palms offered shade that felt like a sermon. Frontierland smelled faintly of gunpowder, as if the West itself had exhaled. Tomorrowland blinked with aluminum certainty. Pick one, anyone. Each choice today ran through the same bottleneck: heat, bodies, delay. A man next to me folded his map into a fan and offered half the breeze to a stranger. A mother broke off part of a sandwich and handed it to a boy who wasn't hers, because the day required small kindnesses to stay civil. A teenager pretended not to wilt and then sat down right on the curb, pretending it was on purpose. We all performed a little. What nobody realized yet was how the counterfeit tickets and fence crawlers were sabotaging every calculation. Crowd control plans looked smart on paper. Paper didn't sweat. The staff moved fast, directing, smiling, apologizing with their eyes when their mouths had to keep the cheer. A cast member in wool tweed fanned a grandmother with a map and cracked, "It'll cool off by Christmas," and the laugh bought them a minute. Near the castle, a microphone stand waited for a voice that could settle the room. Not fix it, just steady it. But before that vow, the park had to live through the coughs of its own machinery. And standing there with my collar damp and my patience thin, I took a warm sip of soda and told myself the same thing everyone else did. It'll be fine once we're on a ride. Meanwhile, across the park, magic met machinery and started arguing. I headed for the Jungle Cruise first, lured by a shade and a promise of cool water, even if it only pretended to be a river. The line coiled like a sleeping snake, and when we finally stepped onto the dock, the skipper flashed a grin that said he'd been smiling since sunrise. We pushed off. 2 turns in, the engine coughed like an old smoker and died. The boat drifted, bumping reeds that didn't mind. For a heartbeat, the heat got louder. Then the skipper leaned into the microphone and saved us. "Folks, please don't worry. These waters are home to very shy mechanics." The boat laughed as one, and you could feel the tension crack like ice. We floated silent for a minute, watching a hippo blink with total indifference. A second boat stacked up behind us, a third behind that, like a parade that forgot its choreography. The skipper kept patter going, pointing to the back of the boat. "That's our outboard prayer wheel. Spin it and think good thoughts." When the engine finally sputtered awake, the boat cheered like a little league crowd. You could hear another skipper upriver borrowing the same jokes. On that river, humor kept the illusion stitched together, while the machinery argued with the temperature. Autopia wasn't as forgiving. Out on those bright little highways, kids and teenagers became wannabe stunt drivers before the seatbelt settled. The cars looked like candy, handled like shopping carts, and the minute heat soaked the track, the engines started to complain. I watched a boy floor it, bump the guide rail, and grin like he'd just invented chaos. Multiply that by 100, and you got a symphony of rubber squeals, metal clinks, and parents shouting variations of, "Keep it straight." The asphalt wore fresh scars by noon, thin black commas where tires had written their own punctuation. You could smell oil and hot plastic. Attendants jogged with tight smiles, flagging cars that stalled like stubborn ponies. A girl in cat-eye sunglasses nudged her car an inch at a time, then stalled dead in the apex of a curve. She threw both hands up, surrendering to the day, and a teenage attendant jogged over, gave her a push, and said, "Now it's a convertible with attitude." The line laughed, the girl laughed, and for 30 seconds, the sun felt like part of the joke instead of the enemy. Across the way, King Arthur carousel spun in polite defiance. The music tried to float above the heat, calliope notes like bubbles in soup. Every so often, metal clanked in a way that said someone had tightened a bolt in a hurry. A horse stuck for a heartbeat before rising, and a little boy's face switched from worry to triumph so fast you could hear his mother exhale. There's a special kind of courage in refusing to break rhythm when your insides are rattling. That carousel had it. I spotted one family I'd seen on Main Street. Dad's tie loosened, Mom's hair pinned into a truce with the humidity. 2 kids, hunting magic like it, owed them lunch. They'd aimed for Fantasyland, met a closed door on Peter Pan, camera priority, they said, and pivoted without drama. Frontierland, then. The Mark Twain paddle wheel looked steady as an uncle who knows how to barbecue. The river breeze felt like a sermon about patience. They leaned on the rail, and for the first time all day, those kids went quiet. Eyes on water, ears on that slow churn only a paddle wheel can sing. Over near the trains, you could see the heat playing tricks on timing. Dispatches drifted, signals lagged. The Disneyland Railroad was supposed to be the park's heartbeat, steady, reassuring, but even hearts skip beats in weather like that. Announcers stretched their words like taffy, filling gaps for the live broadcast. And if you look to your left, became a poem with too many commas. Cameramen hunted angles that hid the stalls and found the smiles. Broadcast is a magician. It asks you to notice what it wants you to see. Then came a small collapse that said everything about the day. A young cast member in a wool vest took 2 careful steps and melted into a crouch, the kind you take when your body writes its own script. Another kid, barely older, fanned her with a folded map, and someone handed over a paper cup with 2 fingers of water like it was medicine. She stood again, wobbly but proud, and the tiny knot of strangers clapped once, just once, and moved on. We were all holding each other up in little ways, pretending we weren't. Here's the detail that explains the rest. Nobody on the ground knew how many extra people had slipped past the math. Counterfeit tickets, ladder climbers, folks who found a hole in a fence and called it destiny. Every one of them turned lines into snakes, schedules into rumors. A plan calibrated for a crowd became a plea addressed to a wave. Systems forecasted an afternoon. The afternoon answered with a flood. By late day, word of mouth split in 2, and both halves were true. Some people were giddy, sun-stroked, dazzled, carrying souvenirs that would outlast the blisters. Others were scorched, heels dented, patience gone, pocket maps gone soft as cloth. But all of them were talking. That's how days like this survive. They get told and retold until the rough edges turn into the story's grip. And in the middle of it, heat shimmer, engines coughing, cameras prowling. One voice stepped up to pull a center line through the chaos. A microphone waited by the castle. The crowd drifted toward it the way people move when they sense a ritual about to begin. The rides might not listen. The people would. We drifted toward the castle like iron to a magnet. The crowd pressed in, a slow tide, faces shiny with heat and expectation. A microphone stood there waiting, thin and stubborn like a flagpole in a storm. And then Walt stepped up, tie neat, eyes tired and bright at the same time, the look of a man who'd carried a mountain and still had to smile for the summit photo. He didn't clear his throat for effect. He did it because the air was thick. I was close enough to see his hand, a small tremor that read as human, not fear. When he spoke, the words weren't victory. They were permission. To all who come to this happy place, you know the line, we all do. But that day, it wasn't etched in bronze yet. It was soft clay shaped by heat and hope. You could feel the syllables settle the room, like somebody finally set down a heavy box and admitted it was heavy. He kept it spare. He talked about the past, the present, the future, Main Street to Tomorrowland in one breath. And he asked us to believe not in perfection, but in the project. I felt sweat sting my eyes and blamed the sun, but the truth is, the words hit. They framed the day as a beginning, not a judgment, a vow, not a boast. I glanced at the cameras, great insect machines craning and peering, and thought about the number I'd heard. 90 million watching from couches and kitchen chairs. That's not an audience. That's a country leaning in. Art Linkletter slid into the gaps like only he could, tossing gentle jokes that let folks at home exhale. Reagan had that neighborly ease, tossing us verbal handshakes, making the broadcast feel like a backyard barbecue, even while the asphalt argued with our shoes. You could sense the choreography behind the smiles. Producers counting beats in headsets, stage managers waving subtle semaphore from the edges. But the heart of it was simple. The day needed a spine. The speech gave it one. For a minute, the rides didn't matter. The thirst didn't matter. The crowd went quiet the way people do when something shared passes between strangers and turns them into a we. There was a hitch, the kind that becomes legend later. A mic crackle, a camera cutting a half-second late, a cue that didn't fire. It didn't break the moment. It made it honest. Walt smiled like a father who knew the birthday cake was slightly lopsided and served it anyway. The castle behind him looked newly born, paint still smelling faintly sweet, turrets sharp against the sky. And in that light, the words felt like a christening. Art took the baton and improvised, guiding a pivot to the next live segment with a patter that felt like a wink we all shared. Reagan filled with a story about firsts, the first train whistle you never forget, the first time a kid sees a tower and decides it's theirs. Television and the park braided together in real time, each forgiving the other's gaps. And me? I stood there, shirt plastered to my back, shoes warm, throat dry, and felt something settle. The heat didn't lift. The lines didn't disappear. But the center held. We weren't just customers anymore. We were part of a promise that said, come back tomorrow and we'll be better. Come back next summer and we'll be different. In a country speeding into freeways and TV dinners, that vow felt like a hand on your shoulder. The applause wasn't thunder. It was steady rain, hands meeting in a rhythm that said, we understood. The broadcast moved on, the cameras swung away, the crowd flowed back toward lands with names like chapters. The day still had to be lived, but the word stayed, hanging in the heat like shade that wasn't there a minute ago. By afternoon, the park turned into a patchwork of little human rescues. A mother on Main Street unwrapped wax paper and split a sandwich into thirds, one for her daughter, one for a quiet boy whose parents were 2 bodies away, one for herself. No speech, no fuss. The paper crinkled like a secret they agreed to keep. 2 bites in, the boy smiled with half his mouth, then leaned into the shade of a lamppost like it was a friend A cast member in a straw boater slipped behind a storefront and came back with a stack of paper cups. He filled them from a back spigot that sounded like a tired throat clearing. He handed them out with a rhythm. Pour, pass, nod. When he ran out of cups, he refilled a rinsed soda bottle and passed that until it made a loop back to his hands. That's how you keep a story from cracking. You find the seams and press your thumb there. A kid, 8 maybe, saw the castle for the first time from the curb. He went stone still. His father leaned down, said something soft, and the boy didn't move. Wonder can look like defiance when the body can't make more room inside for feeling. Then his chin lifted a half-inch, and you could read the thought right across his face. That's mine now. He deserved that victory, even if Peter Pan's door was closed and the drawbridge creaked like it needed a nap. Main Street kept its own stubborn charm. The barbershop harmonized in bursts, 4 bars clean, then a break when one tenor stepped aside to cough, then 4 more bars like nothing happened. The air smelled like sugar and new paint with a thread of old wood cut into it. Every door caught a current and whispered. You'd swear the storefronts were gossiping about the crowd, telling each other who needed a bench and who needed a laugh. Over in Frontierland, the air had that faint tang of black powder from show cues. A kid with a coonskin cap too big for his head saluted a passing raft as if the frontier were taking attendance. His mother dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief that once lived in her purse and now lived for this job. The shade along the stockade wall turned into a community college in patience. Strangers compared maps. A man traced an alternate route with his finger like he was plotting a cattle drive. Adventureland offered truce. The y'all palms threw cool scraps of shadow that migrated across faces and legs like blessings. A couple sat on a low wall and shared the last of a warm Coke with the seriousness of communion. 2 sips pass, 2 sips pass, no arguing the split. Somewhere, a parrot shrieked at the wrong moment, and the whole line laughed because it felt good to laugh at anything that wasn't a delay. Tomorrowland blinked like a radio panel. A boy rested his head against a gleaming rail and stared at a rocket as if it were a promise mailed to him from next week. His sister squinted at a plastic model of a city on stilts and asked, "Do they have shade in the future?" Their dad said, "They better," and she accepted that as policy. The winds came small and loud. A seat secured on a boat. A breeze that found a neck. A stall that cleared just as a toddler lost the last of his patience and then rediscovered it in the motion of wheels. A paper ticket softened by sweat until it felt like fabric, folded and unfolded until the creases learned the hand that owned them. I kept mine in my pocket and patted it like a talisman when a line shifted and hope needed a nudge. A teenager with a sunburn like a map line tap danced 3 beats on a curb to make a little sister smile, then stopped embarrassed when 2 strangers clapped. A granddad in a hat fanned a baby with his own straw brim, then set it back on his head at an angle that said he'd do it again in a second. A young couple argued quietly, then laughed louder, then split the last 3 peanuts in a bag with a fairness Solomon would have admired. By nightfall, something in the park exhaled. The heat eased its grip. The sky went soft at the edges. Lights along Main Street clicked on one by one, each bulb of forgiveness. The castle picked up a faint glow and looked less like a goal and more like a lighthouse. People walked slower, tempers unclenched. You could hear tired children humming ride melodies they barely experienced, already sanding the day into memory. That's how a legend hardens, not with a perfect show, but with 100 small mercies repeated until they become the story you tell at dinner. The rough spots don't vanish, they become texture. And when the band played a last wavering chord and the crowd drifted to the gates, it felt like a town closing up for the night, promising to open again better, cooler, kinder. The day hadn't been easy. It had been hours. Morning after, the papers sharpened their pencils and went to work. Black Sunday, they called it, like the park had tried to hold the sun in its hands and got burned for the trouble. Reporters loved the heels in asphalt photos, the dry fountains, the ride coughs. I read the clippings with a cup of coffee and a sore back and thought, fair, brutal, but fair. It had been chaotic, sweaty, human, not a myth, yet. But here's the part people miss when they tell the story for the punchline. The fixes started before the ink dried. Water lines opened like arteries. Fountains ran, not just for pretty, but for relief. Ice showed up in trucks that looked like cavalry. Food stockpiles swelled. Kitchens learned new math and new shortcuts. Maintenance crawled the rides like surgeons, tightening, tweaking, replacing bolts, chosen in that hot rush with ones meant for a war of attrition. Schedules got rewritten with the truth in mind, real crowds, real fatigue, real weather. I walked the park 3 days later, and it felt different. Not perfect, nothing breathing ever is, but steadier, like a bridge that had been stress-tested and decided to stand. Cast members traded notes like baseball cards, shade tricks, cue management, new gags that cooled tempers. A man at the Jungle Cruise dock taught rookies how to spot heat swoons 2 faces ahead. Autopia added breathers between dispatches so engines wouldn't cook themselves. The carousel sang cleaner, fresh grease, fresh confidence. Railroad crews adjusted timing so the heart beat regular again. Phones lit up across the suburbs. You could hear it in diners and at barber chairs. We're going this weekend. Families voted the only way that matters. Tires on road, tickets at gate. In 7 weeks, 1 million people pushed through those tunnels under the railroad and made the place theirs. That number wasn't hype. It was station wagons and Sunday hats and lunch pails packed with cold fried chicken to cheat the budget. The crowd that scorched on opening day told the next crowd to go anyway. That's how trust moves, hand to hand, story to story. The press kept a skeptical eyebrow raised, but their tone softened when the photos changed. Smiles landed easier. Heels stayed above the asphalt. Water sparkled in basins that had been punchlines last week. One columnist admitted the truth in a single sentence. They listened. That was a miracle, if you ask me. Not that a park survived a bad first day, but that a company built on fantasy treated feedback like oxygen. A quiet formula took root under the bunting. Build, stumble, listen, fix, repeat. It became the unglamorous backbone of an industry. You could see other parks take notes. Better crowd flow, more shade, staff trained to improvise kindness, not just enforce rules. The word guest settled in and refused to leave. People mocked the language, people felt the difference. Main Street held fast as home base. It kept teaching the same lesson, start and end in a place that feels familiar, no matter how wild your middle gets. Fantasyland learned to do what the posters promised. Stagecraft tuned so a door closed for a camera one day didn't close for a kid the next. Adventureland leaned into shade and timing. Frontierland found the right cadence for spectacle. Tomorrowland kept its gleam, but added places to sit and dream without squinting. I went back at the end of those 7 weeks. Same railroad bridge, now smelling like a machine that had found its rhythm. Same castle, still crisp against the sky, but friendlier somehow. Less debutante, more neighbor. The pathways were cooler. The staff read the room faster. The rides handled the heat like locals. I bought a cold drink that was actually cold and stood in the hub while a breeze threaded the flags and thought, this is what a promise looks like after it's kept twice. once in bronze, once in sweat. And I believed again. I think I did. That day wasn't failure, it was rehearsal in public. America's living rooms met America's Main Street, and the handshake held. The plumber's choice still feels like a parable. Dignity before sparkle. We forgive a stumble when the intention's honest. Families argued, laughed, and made a ritual they could return to. Under the paint, the orange grove stayed, roots reminding the dream who it served. The ground was hot. The promise was cool. Both were true. And that's why walking under that railroad bridge still feels like entering a memory that keeps rewriting itself kinder. From that chaotic Sunday, Disneyland became more than a theme park. It became proof that imagination could build a world of its own. Every hiccup and mistake turned into legend. Every laugh echoed louder than the misfires. Walt Disney once said, "Disneyland will never be completed." And maybe that's the secret, because what began as a messy miracle in 1955 still reminds us. Magic isn't about getting it perfect, it's about believing anyway.